Hey there. So today I want to be looking at one of the fundamental concepts that I like to teach beginning photographers. And it's a concept that I'm actually going to look at in a number of different ways over several different videos. So, and that's the whole concept of contrast. And so obviously the first thing that leaps to mind when I talk about contrast in regards to photography is, of course, contrast between lights and darks. The brightest brights and the darkest darks, and that is actually what I'm going to be talking about today. Kind of the way I make use of contrast and the way I like to look at that in my photographs, and hopefully help you in your photographs. But I also like to look at contrast in a number of different ways, and I'll be doing that in some other videos subsequent to this one. So anyway, for today, we're going to jump right into contrast. So the contrast between lights and darks. So contrast is an idea, obviously, that's fundamental to photography. And, you know, the contrast between lights and darks gets used in photography a lot of different ways. I mean, just the controls for clarity, for texture, for sharpening are all working with contrast in different ways and to different degrees. So really, contrast is something that's a fundamental part of creating a good image. But I want to show you some things that I look for out in the field, and you know, just in the image itself, when I capture an image, and how I might use an image in regards to contrast. So let's take a look over here in Lightroom, and I've got some images I want to show you so I can talk a little bit more about this whole idea. Okay, so one of the images I want to point out here, and I'm going to use black and white for this example because obviously that's where contrast jumps out the most, is in black and white, and that's originally where photography started, was in monochrome images. So I'm going to look at these monochrome images and talk a little bit about how contrast is working for these. So in this image of the Grand Canyon, I chose to shoot through this juniper tree and kind of use the branches of this tree to frame in this photo. So now obviously that's another concept in photography in composition, which is framing. But framing is working well in this image for the reason that the tree is darker than the scene behind it, and the eye likes to go to lighter areas. So these snow-covered hills here and some of the sky and clouds back in the background, the eye tends to go into those areas, and that's why the dark frame, even though it's in the foreground, it recedes a bit in the image because the eye goes to the light. So that's a way that contrast is effectively working in this image to both create this frame, right? If it was the same tone as this area, it wouldn't be an effective frame. It would all kind of blend together. But since it's darker, it really stands out. And then also it creates some depth because you know this is closer. The eye automatically differentiates between these two areas, and it allows this back area to really, you know, jump out and be the thing that's the main focus and framed in the image. So that's a way. This is a good example for how I'm using contrast in this image. Now here's another image that I did recently, and the final is down here, but I want to first show you the initial image. And it's some frost-covered aspens. And the way the contrast works in this is really an extreme example of contrast. This is backlighting. So the hill behind these aspens was a pretty steep hillside covered in mostly conifer trees, and the sun it's in the morning, kind of late morning, because it's raking down this hillside and it's lighting up just these trees in the foreground, and that allowed me to get this really strong contrast with this backlighting. So that's Another thing that I look for out in the field is opportunities for backlighting. So part of what makes the backlit aspens, of course, jump out so much is that what they're against is a nice dark background. So this is the original image, and the color balance, the white balance, it looks a little warm to me. I wanted a cooler feel. It's the onset of winter. I wanted it to feel a little colder. So here is the color worked file that I did, and you can see if I toggle back and forth, I really didn't do a lot. I cropped in a little bit. I cooled off the tone, the color balance, the white balance, and I also worked a little bit with the tonalities, but not a lot. I didn't have to do a lot. So this was an instance where I found something great right out in the field, and that's always the best to me. It's like there's not as much I have to do afterwards. In post, I'm just kind of tweaking it and bringing out what I want instead of trying to create it. So it was, this has a really bold contrast to it. Just because of the backlighting, this is white frost on all these tree limbs. It really, it jumps out. If I zoom in here, you can really see how those limbs and that frost just jumps out. And then I decided to take it to black and white so that I could even emphasize this stuff a bit more and really work with this tonality. But you can see I've not done major move here. It's fine-tuned, but it's not, I didn't really have to jump through any big hoops to create the contrast in this image. It was already there in the field, out in the lighting. So that's something that I look for, is that kind of dramatic lighting that I can really just emphasize in the final product. And so I think in this final monochrome, I was able to get some of the more subtle differences in the light and shadow in through here, and the really bright tree limbs on this side. And you can see here how they just really jump out against that dark background. And the conifer trees, the pine trees and spruce really work well with this, in that they tend to go darker. So that dark green of those trees tends to be darker, and they've still got a little highlight around the edges, so just enough to see that there is something back there. The trees aren't on a pure black field. There's a little bit back there just to give them a bit of context of where they're at. So that I think is another effective example of contrast. Now here's another one that I've done. Some aspen trees. This is just focusing in on the trunks, and this is using contrast in kind of the opposite way of what I did in the Grand Canyon example. So my main tree obviously is this one in front, and it's the brightest, and the eye goes to that. But these others, I basically kind of worked with the contrast to get that nice gradation across there, and of course they're lit on the edges, so it helps to give them kind of this nice sense of the shape of the trunks back here. But since they're a little darker, they kind of recede into the background, and they become part of the supporting cast for this main subject right here in the middle. So that's working with contrast in a little different way from the original image that I showed you. So anyway, there's some great examples of contrast and looking for opportunities for contrast out in the field. So I hope that helps. Go out and try this. Practice it. Look for opportunities where the lighting is dramatic. Maybe you get a dramatic backlit scene, or you get a scene where you can frame it in with a darker foreground looking through to the brighter background and main subject off in the distance. So try those things out in your photography. Again, let me know what you think. Like this video. Make sure to hit that button if you like it. Let me know what you would like to hear more about, and I really appreciate you taking a few minutes, and I'll see you around soon. If you're interested in learning more about photography, be sure to head on over to my website, caseychinphotography.com, and look under the Workshops tab. I've got links for online workshops, intermediate and advanced workshops, in-person workshops, and also a workshop interest questionnaire. Let me know what you're interested in learning more about. And when you enroll in one of my workshops, you'll also have access to my Facebook group, Casey Chin Photography Workshops. This Facebook group is designed for participants in my workshops. It's a place where you can share your images, get feedback from myself and others, and build community with other people who are passionate about and interested in photography.